Let's begin with a reality that is rarely acknowledged in open conversation. True emotional exhaustion does not usually look like a nervous breakdown. It rarely resembles the cinematic image of someone weeping in a dark room or refusing to get out of bed. More often than not, it looks like high-functioning reliability. It looks like waking up when the alarm rings, making the coffee, answering the urgent emails, smiling at colleagues, and meeting every single deadline, all while feeling completely hollowed out inside. It looks like resilience. It looks like responsibility. To the outside observer, it looks like everything is perfectly fine. The adult who is suffering from deep emotional depletion is almost never the dramatic one. They are not loud about their struggles. On the contrary, they are usually the most dependable person in their social or professional circle. They are the ones who keep the machinery of life running, the ones who never complain, and the ones upon whom everyone else leans. And that is precisely how the depletion begins. It is rarely a sudden event. There is no singular explosion where a person declares, "I cannot do this anymore." Instead, the process is an erosion. It is a slow, silent creep. It manifests as a little less patience with the kids, a little less enthusiasm for hobbies that used to bring joy, and a strange gravitational heaviness in the limbs upon waking, regardless of how many hours of sleep were achieved. What makes this state so disorienting is the disconnect between the external evidence and the internal reality. On the surface, life seems successful. There are routines, paychecks, and social engagements, but internally, there is a profound weariness that a weekend off cannot cure. This is because the exhaustion is not somatic. It is not of the muscles. It is an exhaustion of the spirit and the mind, the result of carrying too much for too long without setting it down. Frequently, the adults who find themselves in this state learned a specific lesson very early in life, that their emotions were things to be managed, not felt. Perhaps they were raised in homes where stoicism was praised as the highest virtue, while vulnerability was viewed as an inconvenience. Many of them were parentified children, the ones who had to grow up too fast, who became the peacemakers, the listeners, or the fixers for the adults around them. Over decades, they internalized a dangerous equation: my worth is equal to what I can handle. So, they handled it all. They absorbed the pressure at work. They managed the disappointments of their partners. They navigated the emotional turbulence of their friends. They took ownership of problems that did not belong to them. And because they made it look effortless, nobody ever stopped to ask if the weight was crushing them. This specific brand of exhaustion creates a target out of the deeply empathetic. These are people who are naturally wired to feel intensely, yet have trained themselves to display nothing. They are hyper-aware of shifts in tone, micro-expressions of displeasure, and the unspoken tension in a room. For someone wired this way, the world is incredibly loud. Every social interaction requires a calibration of self. Every relationship demands emotional labor. When there is no sanctuary where they can lay that burden down, the residue begins to accumulate. Eventually, the nervous system, tired of being perpetually on high alert, initiates a defense mechanism: numbness. This numbness is often mistaken for apathy, but it is actually a survival strategy. It is not that the person has stopped caring, it is that caring has become too expensive. To protect the core self, the mind turns down the volume on all sensory input. Joy becomes muted. Sadness feels foggy and distant. Even anger loses its fiery edge, becoming a dull irritation. Emotionally exhausted people often describe this as feeling flat or living behind a pane of glass. They aren't necessarily miserable, but they aren't fully alive. They are managing life, not inhabiting it. To the outside world, this withdrawal can look like laziness or a lack of ambition. From the inside, it feels like operating a machine with a battery that is permanently flashing red. A secondary symptom, often a source of great shame, is irritability over trivial matters. When a person's emotional reserves are bankrupt, their window of tolerance shrinks. A spilled cup of coffee or an unexpected phone call can feel like a catastrophe. This isn't because the person is unreasonable, it's because they have no buffer left. When you have been holding the sky up for years, a feather landing on your shoulder feels like a sledgehammer. The exhausted adult often feels immense guilt over this. They berate themselves for not being more grateful, for feeling overwhelmed when their life looks so good on paper. They fail to realize that they are comparing their internal load to everyone else's external highlight reel. Everyone carries invisible backpacks. Theirs is simply full of rocks they never agreed to carry. Another insidious layer of this condition is the accumulation of unexpressed emotion. Feelings that are not processed do not vanish. They sediment in the body. They manifest as chronic tension in the jaw, shallow breathing, restlessness, or inexplicable fatigue. Because these adults often do not feel safe expressing raw emotion, they learn to intellectualize it. They can articulate exactly why they are stressed. They can analyze their trauma with the precision of a surgeon. But analyzing a feeling is not the same as feeling it. They become experts at explaining their pain rather than releasing it. This leads to a profound disconnection from the self. They know what they should feel, and they remember what they used to feel, but accessing those emotions is like trying to tune into a radio station that has gone out of range. In this phase, relationships often suffer. The exhausted adult still loves their people, but they struggle to perform the rituals of connection. Conversation feels like a tax. Socializing feels like a performance. Even the presence of loved ones can feel like a sensory assault. This creates a heartbreaking internal conflict. They desperately crave connection and intimacy, but they possess no energy to fuel it. Consequently, they withdraw, not out of coldness, but out of self-preservation. Unfortunately, this withdrawal is frequently misinterpreted by others as rejection, which only reinforces the exhausted person's belief that they are failing, deepening the cycle of depletion. There is also a silent grief that accompanies this state, a mourning for the version of oneself that felt lighter. There is a grief for the lost excitement, for the ease of laughter, for the person who didn't view every calendar invite as a threat. This grief is rarely validated because it isn't tied to a death or a tragedy. It is the cumulative loss of the self, shaved away by years of overextension and self-denial. Identity becomes a casualty of exhaustion. Many of these high-functioning individuals define themselves by their utility. If they are not helping, fixing, or achieving, they feel useless. This makes rest feel dangerous. Slowing down feels like a confrontation with their own perceived inadequacy. So, they double down. They tell themselves, I just need to get through this week, or things will calm down after this project. But the horizon line always moves. There is always another thing. Eventually, the disconnect between external performance and internal collapse becomes unsustainable. Motivation evaporates, concentration fractures. Small decisions, like what to make for dinner, feel impossibly heavy. This is not a loss of purpose, it is a biological mandate. The emotional system is demanding a shutdown because it was denied maintenance. At its core, emotional exhaustion is a messenger. It is a quiet but persistent signal that something fundamental has been neglected. It is not necessarily a demand to quit a job or end a marriage, but it is a demand for an honest reckoning with one's limits. One of the most difficult pills to swallow for the strong, capable adult is that human strength is not a renewable resource without recovery. Strength without rest is simply a slow road to destruction. Another challenging truth is that hyper-independence is a trauma response, not a badge of honor. For those who learned that they could only rely on themselves, asking for help feels like defeat. Rest feels like theft. But emotional exhaustion is not a sign that a person is broken. It is a sign that they have been surviving on a deficit for too long. The path toward healing does not begin with fixing oneself or optimizing one's routine to squeeze in more productivity. It begins with noticing. It starts with acknowledging the fatigue that lives beneath the adrenaline. It involves recognizing the numbness as a shield, not a character flaw. It requires witnessing the sadness that has been buried under the armor of competence. Awareness is the gateway to reconnection. The nervous system does not need a vacation, it needs safety. For the emotionally exhausted, safety has been absent for a long time. We are not speaking of physical safety, but emotional safety, the permission to be messy, to be unproductive, to be wrong, and to be tired without punishment. When a person spends a lifetime believing that love and stability are conditional on their performance, their body never truly exhales. Even in moments of leisure, the mind is scanning for the next crisis. This is why relaxing can feel anxiety-inducing. Silence feels heavy because it invites the thoughts we have been running from. A critical, often overlooked component of this exhaustion is self-abandonment. Over years, these adults become masters at overriding their own signals. They ignore hunger, they ignore sadness, they ignore the need for breaks, all in service of getting it done. Eventually, the bridge between the self and the body collapses. They stop checking in because they know the answer will be inconvenient. This is how one becomes a stranger to oneself. They live life from the outside in, dissociating slightly to survive the daily grind. Finally, there is the burden of Emotional intelligence. These adults are often deeply self-aware. They know why they are triggered. They understand their attachment styles. But insight without release is just another heavy thing to carry. They gaslight themselves with their own psychology, telling themselves they shouldn't feel hurt because they understand the other person's perspective. They rationalize their pain away instead of honoring it. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in identity. It requires the terrifying work of disappointing others to save oneself. It requires learning that no is a complete sentence. It involves understanding that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm and expect to survive the winter. Healing is not about becoming a better, more efficient version of the machine. It is about becoming human again. It is about giving oneself permission to drop the ball, to let the emails sit, to be unavailable, and to trust that the world will not end if you take your hand off the wheel. It is recognizing that you are worthy of care not because of what you do, but simply because you exist.